Hello, GCU participants, and welcome to Canyon Professional Development. I'm so excited to have you with us here today as we go through Too Busy to Think Part 1. My name is Jackie Clayton. I've been a high school counselor for 13 years, as well as an adjunct professor. Currently, I am the professor in charge with Ottawa University, where I oversee the Masters in Guidance Counseling. I am also an adjunct professor with PVCC, where I get to work with incoming freshmen as well as high school students getting an edge on their high school and college courses. So currently I have a master's degree in professional counseling as well as a master's in sport and exercise psychology. I am currently pursuing my PhD in general psychology with an emphasis in industrial and organizational psychology with GCU. Yay! And I also do hold numerous ASCA certificates as well. All right. So today I wanted to start with a quote from William Miller, and it's from Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change. People are the undisputed experts on themselves. No one has been with them longer or knows them better than they do themselves. In MI, the helper is a companion who typically does less than half of the talking. So today I'm so excited to introduce MI to you and go over the basic skills. This will allow you to see how empowering MI can be when it comes to student change. And I think that's the main objective, is how do we change student behavior? So I'm sure you're all thinking this is a very true statement. How many of you have had students sit in your office and it does not matter what you recommend or tell them about their behavior, they still believe they know what's best about themselves? So today we're going to look at the basic skills of MI that can lead you to a powerful changing moment with a student in less than 1 to 4 sessions at only 10 to 15 minutes each. Now, you're probably thinking, wow, no way. Well, let's get started and see how this goes. So today we're going to cover 3 areas. This includes the spirit of MI, motivational interviewing, 4 basic steps, which are engage, focus, evoke, and plan. And then we're going to talk about the ORs, which are some strategies that include open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So let's just take a look at the definition of MI first. There is a myth that this theory is manipulative and that you are tricking the student. This is wrong. I like to think of this approach as a guiding approach. It's not directive and it's not following. So I just want you to take a second to think about a boat. What is at the bottom of that boat? The rudder. Can you see it? Close your eyes, visualize the boat and the rudder underneath. It is guiding you in the right direction. That is the whole point of a rudder. And that is your role. You are the rudder, slowly guiding the ship, who is the student, in the direction of change. You are able to empower the student as they are steering the ship towards the change that you want to help them see. And when they get there, you get to see this great aha moment. They did it, and it was their choice. And that is the power of motivational interviewing. So just a common definition is motivational interviewing is about arranging conversations that students talk themselves into change based on their own values and interest. And that's going to be the key today as we move forward. So before we get started with those 3 areas, I want to first talk about the guiding principles that get in the way of using this approach effectively, okay? So it's human nature. You need to make sure you resist the righting reflex. And this is, you want to fix everything. I'm sure that student's sitting across from you and you're just like, I just want to help you. Don't do this or don't do that. Well, you need to resist that righting reflex, okay? The second point is you need to understand motivation. So what is the difference between a student's external and internal motivation, as well as the values that they find important? Okay. The next one is listen. And this is really important. You need to listen for what we call change talk in motivational interviewing. And later we're going to talk about the darn cat. I know it sounds silly, but we're going to talk about the darn cat, and that will be in advanced skills in part 2, Too Busy to Think. Next, we need to empower the client, and this is really important. We want to encourage participation. We want to acknowledge their strength. This is a strength-based approach, okay? And it's really important that we're able to empower the student, let them know we see the strengths, we know you have them, and let's build on that, all right? So now the most critical tips that I can give you with MI before we get started is don't give lots of advice. This is also known as the writing reflex. When I'm teaching this course, I always like to tell my students learning the new theory, you gotta bite your tongue, okay? So just make sure before you go to give that advice, bite your tongue. Just give it a second, let that student process the information. Next, don't bring your own agenda. I mean, how many times have students said, I don't want to hear from an adult. I don't want to do what my mom and dad are telling me. I don't want to do what the teacher is telling me, right? So make sure you're not bringing your agenda into the conversation with the student. It is all about them and what they are going through at that time. And then again, to go along with that, don't be that typical adult, as I had mentioned, okay? So close your eyes and put yourself in a teenager's shoes. What teenagers experience most from adults, particularly in their school experience, are from teachers. They want them to perform. Administrators, they want them to conform to school rules. Coaches, they want them to practice and perform with intensity. And parents, who want all of that all together. The problem with this is they're all external forces driving the change. It's important that we look at the internal process of the student in order to help them change. So here's a perfect example of how you cannot be that typical adult. For a minute, forget all the adults in your life, your parents, your teachers, me, what you want for yourself academically, or etc., something else. What would success look like for you? This is allowing the student to process what it is that they would actually like in their life, and that's critical. So next we're going to talk about the spirit of MI. All right. MI is a guiding style of communication, which contrasts with the directing style of communication that I mentioned earlier. When combined with the spirit of MI, it can effectively bring about behavior change, and that's really what we're getting to. So what's included in the spirit of MI? Well, there's 4 areas, and they overlap as you can see, and right in the middle, when you have all 4, that's where we get the spirit. So the first is partnership. This is the conversation about change that occurs between 2 experts. Remember, as we looked at the quote earlier, the student is an expert in themselves, and you are an expert as well. So this is a conversation between 2 experts. Acceptance. You are demonstrating by honoring the individual's absolute worth and potential as a human being, okay? So accurate empathy is a key component of acceptance. The next is compassion. Practicing compassion considers the way a youth prefers to carry out his or her change plan and supports it, whether it's through the goals, values, or emotions. And those 3 items are going to be critical when we are looking for change talk with students in the MI process. We are looking for one of those 3 things that they start to talk about. The next is evocation. This is eliciting reasons from the student responsible for carrying out the change. It's critical for MI. Students are more likely to follow through with a plan that was their idea. Just think about that for a second. Students are more likely to follow through with a plan that was their idea. I always like to briefly cover what I call the MI believers and how their through process works, their thought process works with this style of communication. Okay, so ambivalence is a natural part of the change process. Everyone is ambivalent about something. Decisions are always on a spectrum, and students waver back and forth. Students want to be the best version of themselves, and that's important for you to remember. Given the right environment, people tend to lean to the best outcome. After all, aren't students the number 1 expert on themselves? So, students first. MI should never be used to get students to do what adults want them to do. It is about helping students achieve what they want for themselves, and that is the spirit of MI. So next we're going to talk about the 4 steps: engage, focus, evoke, and plan. Okay? And we're going to break them down in a more detailed way. So those 4 steps, we're going to spend more time on these processes in the next slides. So first, let's start with engaging. Engaging with the student and forming a relationship is the foundation for having conversations about actual change. As a counselor, teacher, administrator, it's important that you take the time to build this relationship in order to see any changes occur in the future. This may include understanding external stressors that might be affecting the student during school and outside of school. So to build the relationships, we will be giving you some oars. Remember, you're the rudder, the student's the boat, but we need some oars. We call those the strategies, right? We're going to help the student navigate the ship with this. So trust me, this is all going to come together shortly. Stay with me. Most importantly for this process is that you make sure you do the following: express curiosity and compassion, understand the person's ambivalence or dilemma without judging them. And I know this can be hard, but it is critical. We can't be judgmental. Avoid the writing reflex and listen attentively. Remember, it's not our job to solve the problem and give the student the answers to life. Okay? We're just the rudder guiding them. And finally, listen for what is important to the student with particular attention to, again, those 3 areas: goals, values, and emotions. So the next step is focusing. To build this, engagement leads to trust with the student, which would then guide and prepare you for second processing of focusing. Okay, so think about when it comes to setting goals for things you would like to get done. This is the same process, just a different name. How we attach the focus to a specific purpose or goal that motivates the student. Tips for progressing for the focus stage include recognizing that ambivalence about change is natural. Okay, everyone's got the ambivalent spectrum. They're always wavering on something. Consider goals that might build self-efficacy. Again, that strength-based approach. We're really focused on what the student is doing well. And help the student identify a target behavior that has a sense of importance to them. The next stage is called evoking. All right. Let me move my head down here to the bottom so we can see all those words. Perfect. All right. So the next process called evoking allows the student to verbalize his or her own change talk. Yep, there's that word again. That specific term to MI. And we'll cover this more in detail in Too Busy to Think Part 2. This is where you will help the student to identify the darn cat. Yep, there's that darn cat again. And we're just going to focus right on the word darn for now. Desire, ability, reasons, or a need to change. The cat part is commitment, activation, and taking steps, which we're going to be covering later. Have you ever had a moment when you've started talking out loud about something and then all of a sudden you have this aha moment where you're like, yep, that's what I need to do? That's the same process. When a student is able to verbalize and hear themselves, they talk themselves into changing. So tips for getting evoking going is drawing out the student's reasons and importance for the change. Evoke their own ideas and what they already know. Again, strength-based. Develop discrepancies between the student's current behavior and their goals, values, and emotions. Those 3 items again. And that helps to amplify or create the ambivalence to lead them in the direction that they really want to go in. All right, so let's go to the next stage, which is planning. Put my head down there. There we go. All right, so the final process is the planning stage. The most important piece to realize here is that the planning process cannot occur until the first 3 have actually happened, which is engagement, building that trust, focusing, picking a specific item, and evoking, drawing out that change, right? So tips for getting to the planning process: you're going to generate options for what the student might do to be successful. Next, you'll elicit and affirm strengths, efforts, values, and emotions connected to the plan. You'll share information using the strategy of EPE. This is called elicit, provide, elicit. And this strategy will also be covered in part 2 of Too Busy to Think. And finally, identify specific people that can support the student with their plan. Now, here's the neat thing about MI. You may not get to the planning stage in the first session, and that's okay. Because again, we're just the rudder under the boat. And so we're helping guide the student towards that choice. If they're not ready to make a plan, that's okay. They will come back. Okay. All right, so we're covering this material pretty quickly. Let's go on to the ORs, and we're going to spend a little bit more time here. Again, these are the strategies that you can use to help draw and elicit that conversation to get the change talk going. So ORs are very important and something you want to remember as we move forward using the MI process. All right, so just simply the ORs stand for open-ended questions, a way to invite the student to talk and create extended conversations. These can't be yes or no questions, okay? And you want to make sure you're using the client's words. So open-ended again, this is going to give you more information. Next is affirmations. These help the student to notice that the administrator affirms their student's strengths. Again, we're focusing on the strength-based. We're affirming what we see. They're not just there because they're doing something wrong or the behavior is bad. We want to also affirm that they're doing things that are good as well. The next one is reflective listening, and this reinforces and encourages the client verbalization. Okay, so the administrators not only listens to what the student is saying, but they'll also respond to what is being said. And this is a critical skill in the ORs and a strategy that will help you. With MI, there is both simple reflective skills and there are complex reflective skills. Today, we'll be covering the simple part of it, and complex will be covered in part 2. Finally, summarization. This allows for you to ask if you're understanding them correctly and if you missed anything. Okay, so this will be critical. We're going to go through this, do some examples, and then we're going to have you guys practice some of these actual skills, reflective skills specifically, because that is the key to empathy. All right, so let's start with our open-ended questions first. All right. These are questions that evoke long answers as opposed to just that yes or no short answer that I just mentioned. And this is critical in order to understand the student's perspective and change talk. Again, there's that word. These types of questions empower a student to actively shape the direction of the conversation. And then it also allows for a collaborative approach between the two experts. So let's read the contrast between an open and closed question. Okay. So there should be minimal why questions. And I'm going to emphasize this because they are open-ended questions, but they're not useful until you have built a strong trust and engagement with your student. Why questions can come off as judgmental and put the student on the defense. So I just want to put that warning out there that we try and limit any why questions. So with closed questions, those yes and no's, it's directing a communication style. Yes, no, short response. You're getting minimal or narrowly defined information, so you don't really know where to turn that rudder and guide the ship. Typically, these closed questions start with have, do, are, and can. Now, with open-ended questions, this is more of a guiding communication style. So you're getting longer responses that help you to build up that information. So as it says, elicits broad information, which may introduce new aspects to the topic. So helps you steer that rudder. And finally, open-ended questions typically start with the what, how, desire, and tell me more. And again, just as that disclaimer, try to limit any why questions so that you don't come off as judgmental. Once you build that relationship and the student has been in a few times, the why question will be good down the road. And that's more of an advanced skill that we'll talk about in part 2. So let's talk about affirmations. And yep, here's that darn cat again. We're going to start with just darn, and we'll deal with cat later. But darn stands for desire, ability, reason, and need for change. Okay? So it's really important that you're trying to figure out as the student is talking which of these you can grab onto. Okay? That will bolster their self confidence and their belief that they would be successful if they wanted to make a change to their behavior. All right, so let's go back to the ship. You are the rudder. You're guiding the ship from under. You're using your oars, your strategies to empower the student to make a change. And the affirmations, are you ready? Are the wind that you are putting in the sails that will motivate the student forward. Okay? So it's important that you deliver affirmations that are meaningful, specific, and represent a genuine recognition of the student's ability, their values, their goals, or the emotions. Okay? So affirmation pointers start with you to keep the focus on the student. Reflect one specific value, goal, or emotion that the student has displayed, and state the affirmation as a fact. It's important to remember that statements of praise are different from affirmations. So statements of praise imply an evaluation of the student, whereas the affirmation is more genuine and meaningful. So I have some examples on this slide for you, such as, thank you for all your hard work today. You're determined to make a change. Despite your difficulties, you're still willing to try. You are clearly a very resourceful person. Even though things are difficult right now, you try so hard to. You handled yourself really well in that situation. That's a good suggestion. You're a strong person, a real survivor. And I appreciate your openness and honesty today. So affirmations can be very powerful strategies for you. So next is reflective listening. This is the key to showing empathy. And it sounds pretty simple, but it can be a little bit complex. So we're going to spend a lot of time working on this. And as you can see, we've got the rudder on the ship, and we're going to talk about being a parrot. Okay? So reflective listening makes students feel like you get them. It keeps the spotlight on the conversation on the student. And it gives students the space to process. And this is a true fact for you. Most people process after they speak. Okay? So giving them a few moments to actually process what they just said can be amazing. So if you're reflecting well, you will rarely have to ask any questions. That's the beauty of this. So a very important principle of MI is that people listen to themselves. The beauty of reflective listening is that the student is working out the problem with your help. Again, you're the rudder. You aren't telling them what to do, because if you did, they wouldn't listen. And this is where that aha moment comes in, and the student comes to the realization on their own through this interaction with you. So in part 2, we'll also be discussing complex reflections, which is the next level of reflective listening. Included in your worksheets today is a practice sheet with examples of reflective listening. Please take the time to complete this worksheet once you've completed the course in order to improve your reflective listening skills. And I do encourage you to practice this with your friends, your family, your colleagues, because the more you practice reflective listening and communication, the more natural it will become. Now, just some reflection pointers for you. The art of pause. And sometimes people don't like silence. I know it can be tough. But again, as soon as someone talks, they process what they just said after they speak. So just taking the second to pause is awesome, because it gives them that moment to really process what they just said. Don't turn your reflections into questions. Again, you're just the parrot, okay? You're choosing to reflect back what they just said so they can hear it, all right? One of the older terms used to be what I hear you saying is. So there's other ways that you can start, and we like to call them stems, and they'll be in that worksheet that I talked about. But you could start with, so you feel, or it sounds like you, or you're wondering if, and finally, for you, it's like, okay? Again, make sure you are putting open-ended questions in there when you are asking your student so that you gain more information so that you can reflect back. And ultimately, with reflective listening, the goal is empathy. All right, so let's go over to the summarization page. And I'm going to move my head. Yep. Okay. So with summarization, there's 3 different levels. There's collecting, linking, and transitional. Okay. So summaries organize the student's experience and ensure the conversation stays focused on that behavior. Okay. It's also making a point that what the student has stated to you has been listened to attentively. So summarizations are key. All right. When summaries and conversations are about the change, typically there's more weight on the change talk. We are going to also talk about what we call sustained talk, which is the negative side of things, but that'll be more later. Okay, so Miller and Rolnick in 2013 described these 3 types of summaries, each serving a different purpose. An effective key question will always set the stage. What do you think you might do? Where does all of this leave you? And what might be the next step? Okay, that's the transition after you are able to summarize with the student. So the most critical part, if the student is not ready for the next step, that's okay. They don't have to be. Again, I mentioned earlier, that's the beauty of MI. Sometimes the student just needs to walk out the door, process what they just said out loud, and see how things go. Okay, so one of the summarizations is collecting. You're focusing on the present, you're gathering related topic information, and you're adding topics until the person is finished. So we have talked about how much struggling in math is stressing your relationship with your parents. It's taking up a lot of your time after school that doesn't allow you to hang out with your family. So you're basically summarizing that family is important to them and they value that, and they're upset because they're missing time from them. Another summarization is called linking, and this is connecting the past and the present. And this is where you can develop some discrepancy or that ambivalence. So last week, you were relieved that you got a C on your math quiz. Every time you fail an exam, you get more and more worried about what your parents will think. Okay? And finally, transitional. This wraps up a task or a topic in preparation to move on to that something else or those key questions that I had just mentioned. So with every attempt to pass your math exam, you learn what works and doesn't work when studying. You are concerned that you are letting your parents down. You are getting stronger at preparing yourself for your exams. Where does this leave you now? So that's getting us wrapped up, having the student understand what we just heard from them. They get to hear it back. You are that parent. And then they get to decide, where does this leave me now? All right. So just some tips with summarization. Use summaries to highlight change talk and affirm the student's goals, values, or emotions. Again, one of those 3 things. Begin a session with a brief summary highlighting change talk and affirmations from the previous. Now, if this was the first session, you wouldn't be doing a summary. But if the student comes back, let's say 5 days later, give a brief summary. Last time you were here, you discussed this. How are we feeling today? Where are we at? Right? And then aim to close the conversation with a summary plus a key question to assess the impact of the conversation. And again, that key question of where does this leave us now? All right, so let's summarize. Let's put this into motion. So today we talked about the MI spirit, the 4 processes, and we spent a lot of time on the strategies, which we call the ORs. So the open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. Now, as a reminder, MI equals empathy plus change talk. That's what we're looking for. So today we spent a lot of time on the empathy piece. That's the strategies with the ORs, creating that empathy, the process of MI. And then in Too Busy to Think Part 2, that's where we'll be talking more about change talk and how we get the student to change their talk or their behavior instead of using sustained talk. All right. So before you proceed to Too Busy to Think Part 2, the advanced skills of MI, I want you to make sure you work on your reflective listening skills. Again, there's the document attached in your handout that will help you to respond to basic statements that a student might make and will give you an opportunity to respond using those ORs. All right. Now, I'd love to challenge you guys. So over the next week or so, I challenge you to complete the following. Use the worksheet, practice simple reflections. And then number 2, use 3 simple reflections during each student appointment this week. So whether it's a behavioral issue that they're in your admin office, or you've pulled a student down to find out how's it going in their math class, I really want you to focus on trying to use 3 simple reflections with that student. Again, the more you use your simple reflections, the more natural it will become. I can't wait to see you all in Too Busy to Think 2. And I can't wait for you guys to see the automatic transformation in your students with using just simple reflections. So best of luck to you all. Check out that worksheet, and I'll see you in part 2.